There's a certain kind of cruelty that only family can deliver, the kind that's wrapped in a smile, served with Sunday dinner, and administered with surgical precision, the kind that makes you question your own worth, your own sanity, your own right to exist in the spaces you inhabit. Her name was Mira Malik. She was 32 years old, a software architect by trade, and she had been married to her husband, Derek, for 5 years. From the outside, their life looked perfect. A beautiful home in an upscale neighborhood, successful careers, a loving marriage that was the envy of their friends. But appearances, as Mira was about to discover, are the most dangerous weapons of all. Derek's family, the affluent, powerful, and deeply entitled Ashford family, had never accepted her. From the moment Derek brought her home, they had made their disdain crystal clear. She wasn't one of them. She didn't have the right pedigree. She didn't have the right last name. And most damning of all, she didn't have the right bank account. They called her a gold digger. They whispered it at family gatherings. They said it loudly enough for her to hear at dinner parties. They made snide comments about her humble origins and her lucky break in marrying Derek. They treated her like an intruder, a parasite, a fortune hunter who had somehow managed to sink her claws into their precious golden child. Derek, to his shame, never defended her. He would change the subject, make excuses, or simply stay silent while his family tore his wife apart. He loved her, he said, but he was afraid of his family, afraid of losing their approval, afraid of being cut off from the vast Ashford fortune. Mira endured it all with a quiet dignity that masked a growing storm. She smiled. She nodded. She played the role of the grateful, humble wife. But inside, she was building something. A plan, a strategy, a reckoning that would expose every single hypocrite in that entitled, self-righteous family. Because what Mira's in-laws didn't know, what no one in the Ashford family knew, was that Mira wasn't the gold digger they accused her of being. She was the one they should have feared all along. The Ashford family home was a monument to old money, a sprawling Georgian mansion set on 20 acres of manicured grounds with a long gravel driveway, a fountain in the courtyard, and a library that contained more books than most small towns. The kind of house that announced to the world, "We have been wealthy for generations, and we are never, ever going to let you forget it." Mira had never felt comfortable there. The house was cold, despite the roaring fires. The family was cold, despite their practiced smiles. Every visit felt like an audit, a performance where she was always found wanting. The patriarch of the family was Richard Ashford, Derek's father, a silver-haired man in his late 60s with a piercing gaze and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was a retired corporate lawyer who had built the family fortune through a combination of ruthless deal-making and strategic marriages. He valued money above all else, and he measured people by their net worth. The matriarch was Eleanor Ashford, a woman who had married into wealth and had spent the next 40 years perfecting the art of being insufferable. She was the kind of woman who could deliver a devastating insult in the tone of a compliment, who could make you feel like trash while telling you how lovely your dress looked. And then there was Derek's sister, Penelope. Penelope was 35, unmarried, and utterly devoted to her parents' approval. She had never worked a day in her life, but she considered herself superior to anyone who had. She spent her days shopping, lunching, and finding new ways to make Mira feel small. The family's treatment of Mira was systematic. At every gathering, they would find new ways to remind her of her place. They would ask pointed questions about her job, her salary, her family background. They would make jokes about self-made people and how anyone can get lucky. They would drop hints about the prenup they had insisted Derek sign before the wedding. After all, Eleanor would say, her voice dripping with false concern, "We wouldn't want anyone to get the wrong idea about why you married our Derek." Mira would smile and say nothing. She had learned early on that defending herself only made things worse. The more she tried to prove her worth, the more they found ways to dismiss her. It was a game she couldn't win, so she stopped playing. Instead, she started watching, observing, listening. She noticed the way Richard's eyes flickered with greed whenever money was mentioned, the way Eleanor's smile tightened when anyone spoke about her own humble beginnings, the way Penelope's envy of any successful woman was barely concealed beneath a veneer of condescension. Mira started keeping a journal, not a diary of her feelings. She had learned to suppress those. A journal of facts, observations, details, the whispered conversations she overheard at parties, the financial documents she accidentally glimpsed on Richard's desk, the casual cruelties that the family thought no one was recording. She didn't know what she was building, not yet, but something told her that one day the truth would be the most powerful weapon she could wield. It was a Sunday evening in late autumn when everything changed. The Ashfords had gathered for one of their regular family dinners. The dining room was lit by crystal chandeliers, the table groaning under the weight of fine china and silverware. The smell of roast lamb and expensive wine filled the air. Mira sat at her usual place, near the end of the table, farthest from Richard, where she could be easily ignored. Derek sat beside her, but his attention was elsewhere. He was laughing at one of his father's jokes, nodding along to a story about a business deal he had helped close. Mira ate her dinner in silence, as she always did. She had learned that contributing to conversations only invited ridicule. Then Eleanor turned to her with that particular smile, the one that promised cruelty wrapped in kindness. "Mira, dear," she said, her voice carrying across the table. "How is your little job going? Still working at that tech company?" Mira nodded. "Yes, Eleanor. It's going well. We just landed a major contract with—" "Such a shame," Eleanor interrupted, not waiting for the answer. "All that education, and you're still working for someone else. Derek told us you were offered a promotion, but you turned it down. Why would you do that?" Mira felt Derek's hand tighten on her knee under the table. A warning: don't make a scene. Don't embarrass us. "I wanted to focus on supporting Derek," Mira said carefully. "His career is demanding and I—" "Oh, how noble," Penelope said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Sacrificing your career for your husband. How very traditional. I suppose it's easier when you have someone else paying the bills." Myra's jaw tightened. "I pay my own bills, Penelope. I contribute equally to our household." "Of course you do, dear," Eleanor said, patting her hand condescendingly. "We all know you're very independent. It's just that, in a family like ours, we have certain expectations. Standards, really." Richard cleared his throat, and the table fell silent. "What your mother means," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "is that we've always been concerned about appearances. You understand, Mira? We're a prominent family. People talk, and we wouldn't want anyone to get the wrong idea about why you married Derek." "I understand," Mira said quietly, though her heart was pounding. "Good," Richard said, returning to his meal. "I'm glad we can be honest with each other. That's what family is about, after all." The conversation moved on, but Myra's mind was racing. She had been called a gold digger more times than she could count. She had been humiliated, patronized, and dismissed. She had been treated like a servant in her own marriage. And in that moment, something in her snapped. She excused herself from the table and walked to the bathroom. She locked the door, sat down on the edge of the bathtub, and took a deep breath. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. "Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need your help." What the Ashfords didn't know, what no one in that family had ever bothered to learn, was that Myra's father was one of the wealthiest men in the country. His name was Mira Malik. He had immigrated to this country with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. He had worked 16-hour days in a restaurant kitchen while studying at night. He had built a small grocery store into a chain, then a chain into a corporation, then a corporation into an empire. By the time Mira was born, Mira Malik was a billionaire, but he had never forgotten where he came from, and he had raised his daughter with the same values: humility, hard work, and the importance of being valued for who you are, not what you have. Mira had never flaunted her family's wealth. She had wanted to build her own life, her own career, her own identity. She had wanted to be loved for who she was, not for her father's money. When she met Derek and fell in love, she had deliberately downplayed her background. She had told him she came from a comfortable family. She had never mentioned her father's name, his company, or his fortune. She had wanted to be loved for herself. And for 5 years, she had endured the Ashfords' cruelty because she believed that love was worth any sacrifice. But sitting in that bathroom, listening to her in-laws mock and dismiss her, she realized the truth. They would never accept her. They would never see her as anything other than a gold digger. And Derek would never defend her. So she called her father. "I need you to come to dinner," she said. "Next Sunday. I need you to meet the Ashfords." Her father listened in silence. He had always known about the Ashfords' treatment of his daughter. He had offered to intervene many times, but Mira had always refused. She had wanted to fight her own battles. Until now. "What do you need me to do?" Jen asked. Mira smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "Just be yourself, Dad, and bring the car." The next Sunday, the Ashfords gathered again for dinner. Mira had told Derek that her father would be joining them. Derek had been surprised but pleased. "It's about time he met the family," he had said. "He should have come to the wedding." Mira had smiled and said nothing. She knew what was coming, and she couldn't wait to see the look on her in-laws' faces. The Ashfords had dressed for the occasion. Richard was in a bespoke suit. Eleanor was in a designer gown. Penelope had put on her finest jewelry. They were prepared to impress, to intimidate, to remind Mira's father exactly who he was dealing with. At 6 o'clock sharp, a car pulled into the driveway. It was a vintage Rolls-Royce Phantom, polished to a mirror shine, the kind of car that announced wealth with understated elegance, the kind of car that made Richard's Mercedes look like a rental. The Ashfords watched from the window as a driver in a suit opened the door. Mira Malik stepped out, dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored dark suit. He looked every inch the self-made billionaire he was: calm, confident, utterly unimpressed by his surroundings. Mira opened the door. "Dad," she said, embracing him. "Thank you for coming." Mira smiled at his daughter. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." They walked into the house together. The Ashfords were waiting in the living room, their practiced smiles firmly in place. Richard stepped forward, his hand extended. "You must be Mira's father. Welcome to our home. We've heard so much about you." Mira shook his hand, his grip firm. "Have you? I can't say the same. Mira hasn't told me much about you at all." Richard's smile flickered. "Well, we're a private family. We keep to ourselves." "How admirable," Mira said smoothly. "I'm the same way. I've always believed that true wealth doesn't need to be advertised." There was a moment of silence as the implication of his words sank in. Richard's eyes narrowed. He was reassessing, recalculating. Eleanor stepped forward. "Dinner's ready. Shall we?" Dinner was a masterclass in tension. The Ashfords tried to probe Jen's background, to discover how wealthy he really was. They asked about his business, his investments, his connections. Each question was met with a polite, evasive answer that revealed nothing. "We're a modest family," Jen said, buttering a roll. "We don't talk much about money. It's vulgar, don't you think?" Richard's face tightened. "Of course. But in our world, one must be realistic about these things. There are standards to maintain, expectations." "I understand," Jen said. I felt the same way when I was building my business, but I've learned that true standards come from character, not wealth. Mira watched her father operate with something close to admiration. He was dismantling the Ashfords' arrogance with surgical precision, never raising his voice, never losing his cool. Finally, Richard leaned forward. "Mr. Malik, if you don't mind me asking, what is it that you do exactly? I've been trying to place your name, but I can't seem to." "I own a small investment firm," Jian said casually. "A few holdings here and there. Nothing that would interest someone of your stature." Richard nodded, clearly dismissing him as insignificant. "Well, it's a pleasure to meet you regardless. We've always worried about Mira, you know. She comes from such a different background than Derek." "Different?" Jen asked, raising an eyebrow. "You understand," Eleanor interjected. "She didn't grow up with the same advantages. We were concerned she might have expectations, that she might have married Derek for the wrong reasons." There it was, the accusation, spoken aloud for the first time in Jian's presence. Jian set down his fork and looked around the table. His expression was calm, but his eyes were cold. "I understand your concerns," he said slowly. "It's natural to want to protect your family, but I feel I should correct a misunderstanding." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a simple business card. He slid it across the table to Richard. "My name is Jian Malik," he said. "I am the founder and CEO of Malik Holdings. Perhaps you've heard of it." Richard picked up the card. His face went pale. Malik Holdings was one of the largest privately held conglomerates in the country. They owned everything from shipping companies to technology firms. Their annual revenue was in the billions. You're Jian Malik?" Richard stammered. "The Jian Malik? I prefer just Jian," Myra's father said mildly. "But yes, that's me." The silence was deafening. Eleanor's face had gone white. Penelope's mouth was hanging open. Derek was staring at his wife with a mixture of shock and confusion. Richard looked like he'd been slapped. I had no idea," he managed. "We didn't know." "Of course you didn't," Jian said calmly. "Mira has never been one to flaunt her family's wealth. She wanted to be valued for who she is, not for her connections. She wanted to be loved for herself." He turned to his daughter, his voice softening with pride. "She has accomplished more on her own than most people could dream of. She graduated at the top of her class. She built a successful career. She pays her own bills and supports herself completely." He turned back to the Ashfords, and his voice hardened. "She has never asked me for a single penny. She has never used my name to advance her career. She has never relied on anyone but herself. And yet," he continued, his gaze sweeping across the table, "you have spent years treating her like a parasite. You have called her a gold digger. You have humiliated her at every opportunity. You have made her feel small and worthless, all because you assumed she was after your money." Eleanor opened her mouth to speak, but Jian held up a hand. "Let me finish," he said. "My daughter is worth more than everything you own, everything you've ever owned, everything your family will ever own. And she has never asked for any of it. The only thing she ever wanted was to be accepted by the people she loved." He stood up, placing his napkin on the table. "But clearly that is too much to ask." Mira stood up beside her father. She looked at Derek, her husband of 5 years, who was sitting in stunned silence. "5 years," she said quietly. "5 years I've endured this. 5 years I've watched you sit there and let your family tear me apart. 5 years I've waited for you to defend me, to choose me, to show me that I mattered." Derek opened his mouth, but no words came out. "I'm done waiting," Mira said. "I'm done being treated like garbage by people who don't deserve to breathe the same air as me." She turned to the rest of the family. "You can keep your money, keep your house, keep your precious standards. I don't need any of it. I never did." She walked to the door, her father beside her. At the threshold, She'd paused and looked back. "Enjoy your dinner," she said. "I hope it was worth it." The fallout was immediate and devastating. Derek tried to call Mira, but she didn't answer. He showed up at her apartment, a modest place she had kept as a backup, just in case, but she refused to see him. He sent flowers, messages, desperate pleas for forgiveness. She ignored them all. The Ashfords were in crisis mode. Richard was terrified that Mira might expose their treatment of her to the press, or worse, that Malik might use his vast resources to destroy them. Eleanor was in a state of hysterical denial, insisting that she had only been trying to protect the family. Penelope was furious, not at herself, but at Mira for humiliating them. But the real damage was to Derek. He had lost his wife. He had lost the woman he claimed to love, all because he was too weak to stand up to his family. And now he was alone, facing the consequences of his cowardice. The Ashfords' reputation took a hit. Word spread through their social circle about what had happened. People who had once admired their wealth now pitted their poverty of character. They became a cautionary tale, a reminder that money can buy many things, but it can't buy decency. And Mira? Mira thrived. She filed for divorce within a week. She didn't ask for anything. No alimony, no settlement, no property. She just wanted out. She wanted to be free. She went back to her career, throwing herself into her work with renewed passion. She was promoted within months. Then again a year later, she became a partner at her firm, one of the youngest in its history. And she started dating again, cautiously, carefully, with the hard-won wisdom of someone who had learned that love without respect is just a cage. A year after that fateful dinner, Myra's life had transformed. She was happier than she had ever been. She had a fulfilling career, a beautiful apartment, and a circle of friends who loved and supported her. She had reconnected with her father, spending more time with him than she had in years. And she had finally learned the most important lesson of her life, that your worth is not defined by the people who refuse to see it. The Ashfords had tried to make her feel small. They had tried to break her spirit. They had tried to convince her that she was nothing without them. But they had been wrong. They had always been wrong. Mira didn't need their money. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need their validation. She had everything she needed within herself. And when she looked back on those 5 years of humiliation, she didn't feel anger or bitterness. She felt pity. Pity for people who had so little in their lives that they had to tear others down to feel powerful. Pity for a family who had everything and yet understood nothing. She never spoke to the Ashfords again. She never saw Derek again. She heard through mutual friends that he had tried to date other women, but none of them had lasted. He had been ruined by his own cowardice, by his inability to stand up for what was right. Mira didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate his downfall. She just moved on, because that ultimately is the most powerful revenge of all, living well. Mira Malik is still out there, building her life on her own terms. She's a partner at a top tech firm, a mentor to young women in her industry, and a devoted daughter to the father who taught her the true meaning of strength. She doesn't talk about the Ashfords. She doesn't need to. Their cruelty was a footnote in her story, not the main chapter. She rose above it, and in doing so, she proved that the only person who gets to define your worth is you. The Ashfords, on the other hand, are a cautionary tale. They had money, status, and power, but they lacked the one thing that truly matters: character. And in the end, their arrogance cost them everything. What do you think? Was Mira right to walk away? Or should she have fought harder for her marriage? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story of justice and self-respect resonated with you, please give it a like, subscribe to Revenge Doctrine, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story of karma, redemption, and the ultimate power of the underdog. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, It's just walking away and never looking back.